And I pointed out that the DNA molecule consists of two chains of building blocks called nucleotides, very complicated molecules called nucleotides that are bonded into each other end to end. And then two of these chains, tens of millions of nucleotide building blocks long, are then bonded together and then twisted like a ladder that's twisted on itself. Deoxyribonucleic acid. The DNA molecule is coiled and then supercoiled into packets called chromosomes, which are in the nucleus of all cells on living systems on planet Earth. It is the molecule that stores all of the instructions and all of the information necessary to code for all of the functions and produce all of the structures in all living systems. It's an information storage molecule. In the human being, there are 6 billion nucleotides, according to the recently completed Human Genome Project. And in E. coli bacteria, there are about 3 million nucleotides, the building blocks of DNA. I already said that. They're combined together in the double spiral helix, and they carry the instructions to produce all of the structures and control all of the functions in all living systems. Now, in order for organisms to make copies of themselves, they have to have a mechanism to copy the DNA. If a cell is going to have baby cells, it has to figure out a way to make a copy of itself. To do that, DNA has a fantastic ability of duplication. DNA requires about 20 different proteins, enzymes, to make a copy of it. The information on the DNA molecule is then translated to a molecule called RNA, where the information on the RNA is then translated into the production of proteins. And proteins are the stuff of what we're made. It's the thing that makes up our skin, our hair, bones, teeth. Most of the structural parts of your organs and bodies are produced by structural proteins. And then there are what are called functional proteins, which are the proteins that accomplish most of your chemical reactions in your body. And so to copy DNA requires proteins, and to get the information off of the DNA translated to proteins requires proteins. So you have to have DNA and proteins in order for the information on the DNA to be ultimately translated into useful information. Now, I pointed out to the students that the DNA molecule, according to the biochemists at this university, at this very university, if you go to a biochemist and ask them about the structure of the building blocks of DNA and the DNA itself, a knowledgeable molecular biologist, a knowledgeable biochemist will admit to you that today's biochemical expertise or know-how is insufficient to produce the building blocks and even the DNA molecule from the presumed conditions of the early Earth. In other words, today, biochemists cannot even make a DNA molecule using their best biochemical know-how. I told the students, I want you to leave the biochemistry department, go across campus over to the biology department and ask the evolutionary biologists, where did this molecule come from that is so complicated that our biochemists cannot even synthesize it? And they will tell you that it arose by the random combining and uncombining of chemicals in a primordial soup billions of years ago. So, incredibly intelligent chemists can't produce it, but it arose by chance in primordial goo. In effect, it arose from the goo to you by way of the zoo over 3 billion years. It's basically an accident. So one department in that university will tell you they can't even synthesize a DNA molecule, and the other department says it happens by chance. Bit of a disconnect there, don't you think? Now, the DNA molecule, that's the hardware we've talked about a little bit. The DNA molecule carries software. It's the genetic code. It's the coded instructions that code for the production and control all the functions of your organs in your body. First of all, the genetic code is digital. That is, it's expressible in discrete mathematical terms. Next, the DNA code is error correcting. There are a half a dozen known levels of error correction. For example, when a DNA molecule makes a copy of itself and produces 2 daughter molecules, there are 2 proteins for you students, DNA polymerase 2 and 3, that goes along and feels the newly produced daughter molecule, and if it finds an incorrectly placed building block, it pulls it out and puts the correct one in. So it's an error correcting digital information storage and retrieval system. Next, the genetic code is redundant. There are segments of DNA, they're called genes, that are so important that there are sometimes 2 or 3 backup copies in the genetic code of an animal. So that if an error occurs in the primary gene, that it goes undetected, that primary gene is turned off and the backup gene is turned on. It's another form of error correction. Next, the information is overlapping. There are segments of DNA that can actually code for the production of more than one protein and then therefore control more than one function. Imagine a string of letters in the English language, 100 letters long. And you put the spaces at a determined place and it spells out, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, on out for 100 letters. You then squish the letters together, keeping them in the same sequence, and you change the spaces between the letters to a different place. And you begin reading at a different place in the sequence of the letters, and it spells out, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Same sequence of letters gives two intelligible sentences. That's exactly what the DNA molecule does. There are segments of DNA that if you begin reading at, say, building block number 1 in code to, say, building block number 100, it'll produce one type of protein that has one function. And then you move down a little bit and, say, start coding at nucleotide number 25 and go to, say, 125, you get an entirely different protein. So the information is overlapping. Next, the information is semantic. That means it possesses grammar, syntax, and punctuation. I did a study like this down in Southern California at a Calvary Chapel, and a gentleman who's a senior programmer of a high-tech firm down in San Diego came up to me and he said, "This is unbelievable. What you've shared with us here is among the most complicated types of information storage systems that we computer scientists work on. This is an incredibly complicated, taking thousands and thousands of man-hours of programming time to produce such a coding system." A fertilized human egg is about the size of a pinhead. It contains enough information to fill 1,000 books, 500 pages thick, with print so small you would need a microscope to read it. That's how much information is in a fertilized egg to produce a copy of you. If all of the DNA chemical letters in the human body, all of your 100 trillion cells, were printed in books with a Times Roman font size of 12, you could fill the Grand Canyon 50 times with the books that could be produced by the information in your DNA molecules. It's an incredibly, incredibly large amount of information in your DNA molecules. It's a fertilized egg. Next, the information is what is called complex, and the information is what is called specific. Complex information means that, let me give you an example of complex information. If you were to blindfold yourself and begin typing randomly at a computer keyboard, you would produce a sequence of letters that it would be virtually impossible to reproduce, ever in the history of the universe. Try it. Try typing randomly with your eyes covered on a keyboard. It's a complex series of letters that could never be reproduced. The mathematics are, each keystroke is one chance of 26 if you're just looking at the 26 letters of the alphabet. And so complex information is information that is extremely complicated and extremely difficult to repeat. Now, specific information is information which possesses a specific meaning. The typing on the keyboard with your eyes closed would not produce specific information. It would just produce gobbledygook, which is complicated, but it wouldn't specify any special meaning. But specific information is meaning which has a specific meaning. And the DNA molecule is both complex and specific. Specific information would be, for example, if you set a monkey in front of a computer and had them type, they would produce mostly gobbledygook, but occasionally you might see the word DOG, CAT, AND, etc. That information is specific because it has a specific meaning that we assign to those sequences. Now, the thing about the DNA molecule is it is both specific and complex. So that if you put a monkey in front of a typewriter or a computer and let him type for millions of years, he is never going to have the ability to produce both complicated and specific information. It's absolutely impossible, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later, the mathematics behind that. And so the genetic code is an incredibly complex, digital, error-correcting, redundant, overlapping, complex, and highly specific information storage and retrieval system. And it is the type of system which is incredibly complicated in the computer science field. Now, The Human Genome Project, recently finished, determined that there were only 30,000 genes in the human genetic code. I'm skeptical about that. I imagine there's a lot more. But what was startling about that statement was they said that that was far too little information to create a human being if it was read linearly, step by step, like reading a book. It's not enough information to produce you and me. So the question is, how do you make a baby? You know what I mean? Not that. I'm talking about how do you make a baby from, the sperm and the egg coming together. During the development of a human embryo, after that egg is fertilized, thousands of different sets of genes are turned on and off, producing different types of cells. This process occurs for several months until the completely formed cell type and organ are produced. Like the instruments of an orchestra, each gene, think of each gene as an orchestral instrument. Like the instruments of an orchestra, the hundreds of genetic instruments are turned on and off differently in different arrangements, in different ways in the different cell types, thus producing a large number of different cell types, dozens and dozens and dozens of different cell types in a human embryo. Now, each cell type requires a different set of genes to be turned on and off in different sequences to produce the different organ systems. The production of a human infant is akin to dozens of orchestras playing dozens of different tunes for 9 months. 30,000 instruments to choose from, all directed by the same director. Now, that's some talented director, wouldn't you say? So it's an unbelievably complicated orchestration of those 30,000 genes turning on and off in the different cell types, turning on and off at different times to cause the production of a heart cell or a muscle cell or a liver or a brain or a kidney cell, all from those same 30,000 genes. Now, the question is, where did this digital, error-correcting, overlapping, redundant, semantic, complex, and specific information storage and retrieval system come from? I talked to the students at this university. I said, go to the evolutionary biology department. Ask them, where did this system come from? And they will tell you that it too arose by chance. No computer programmer, no information, no thought, no concept to produce this highly complicated code. Now, I said, students, I want you to leave the biology department. Go to the computer science department, which most biologists don't know where that department is. They've never been there. And ask a computer scientist, ask a freshman in the computer sciences department, where does information come from? And they will tell you that according to the principles of information science, information arises only by intelligent contrivance. Chance, they will tell you, is the opposite of information. For you scientists or students, chance is the thermodynamic opposite of information. When a computer scientist writes a computer code or a program or invents a new computer language, they do everything they can to make sure that chance plays no role in the development of code or program. Chance is destructive to existing codes and programs, and every computer scientist knows that the chance strumming of a keyboard will never produce information.